Good evening, everybody. Could we take our seats, please? Alex is here for some reason. Is he? Wait. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Overview Committee. I'm Councillor Pat Edwards, Chair of this committee. The Overview Committee undertakes pre-decision scrutiny of reports going to the Cabinet on the Council's policies, projects, budgets and services. I'd like to remind everyone present at the meeting that it's being filmed and made available to view in live and archive form via the Council's website. If you're seated in the public gallery, it's possible the cameras may capture your image. If you wish to avoid being filmed, it's recommended you make a member of staff, to my right, aware, and she will direct you where to sit. We don't have a cabinet member here. Let's not miss anybody. There's no fire alarm planned for this evening. Should the alarm sound, please leave by the nearest available emergency exit. Two of the closest exits are through the glass door behind you to my left and through the double doors onto the riverside behind you there. Please muster at Tower House car park. Members of the public are welcome to make their own recordings of the meeting using whatever non-disruptive methods they think are suitable. This meeting is being minuted, recorded and will be uploaded to the Council's website. The Westgate Garden gates on the riverside are locked at dusk, so members of the public must leave the Guildhall by the side exit behind the glass door. Apologies for absence. Pippa, can you let us know who apologised?
We have apologies from Councillors Flanagan and Mellish.
And substitute members, thank you.
We have Councillor Mackenzie present as a substitute for Councillor Mellish and Councillor Dupe for Councillor Flanagan.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest by members or officers today? No? Marie, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare that I'm a director on the Kinenco board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Bill.
Thank you, Chair. Just to declare that I'm a director of Stout Environmental Credits. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no public speakers registered for this meeting today. So we move on to agree the minutes of the meeting on the 26th of March 2026. If we're happy, I wasn't there, so I need your general assent. We can do it by general assent. Do people agree? The correct record of the meeting? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. We move on to item 6, a draft housing strategy. This is for adoption. There are no public speakers on this matter, and we're considering the report of Marie Royal, Director of People, and Tracy Chambers, Head of Housing and Community. The officer is Gary Peskett, Housing Strategy Manager. Could I invite the officer to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, let's see if we can make the technology work. Yes. It's on. Oh, that one was on. Yes. Bill's got to sit here holding the wires in all evening. Sorry about this. Right. You're not allowed to move.
No. I'll let you carry on, Gary.
Thank you. Right. Wouldn't be a meeting without a technical glitch, would it? Good evening, everybody. I'm Gary Peskett. I'm the Housing Strategy Manager, and I'd like to introduce the draft housing strategy to you. This came before Overview Committee last on the 12th of February. There have been a number of amendments to the draft strategy, mainly resulting from the public consultation that took place, but also the publication of the Regulation 19 draft local plan, certain changes to housing legislation and regulation. So we thought it was another opportunity to come before the committee to give you a chance to discuss the draft housing strategy. So what I intend to cover tonight is really briefly just the purpose of the housing strategy, the reason why we're refreshing it now, some of the key findings, the results of the consultation with the public, our policy responses, the summary and the next steps, and an opportunity for any questions, comments and feedback from members of the committee. If you've got any direct questions relating to any particular slide, I'm happy to take them as we go through the slide, but anything else, anything wider, perhaps we'll take the questions at the end. So the purpose of the housing strategy is the key document that underpins all our housing related strategies and policies. Strangely, it's no longer a legislative requirement that we have a housing strategy. We have to, by law, have a homelessness and rough sleepers strategy, but not a housing strategy, even though this is really the golden thread that runs through all our housing policies. Its key role is to support the delivery of the local plan, and the housing strategy and the local plan provide each other with mutual support. So a lot of the analysis regarding the housing elements of the local plan are generated by the housing strategy, but also the housing strategy and the local plan share key pieces of evidence and key studies, such as the housing needs assessment. And the housing strategy obviously therefore contains the analysis of local housing needs, particularly the need for affordable housing. And it seeks to identify our local housing priorities and support the delivery of new homes. And also to promote the more efficient use of existing homes. So why refresh now? Well, the current strategy expired back in 2023, so we're sort of 3 years out of date now. And since then, I'm sure everyone in the room has picked up that there have been huge changes in statute, regulation and policy over that time. And also to reflect the aspirations of the City Council. We've got a new corporate plan, we're drafting a new local plan, so there's been a huge amount of movement. And one of the key things was that this document has to support the Regulation 19 draft local plan. That's why it's being done now. The timing was critical because in order to have some form of legal status in the eyes of the planning inspectorate, we had to at least be out to public consultation with the draft housing strategy. We've also got local government reorganisation pending in the next 2 to 3 years. So it's really important that we have some sort of direction for housing and new homes and making better use of the existing stock for that period to give the new authority a good basis to start. We're separating the housing strategy as well from the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. The idea is that we can get sharper focus on both strategic subject areas. As you'll have picked up from the housing strategy, it's a big document, it's a big area of policy that we have to consider. And really it's the same for the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy. So the idea is that it will enable us to be much more focused if we separate them. And last but not least, it's about enhancing our credibility with the regulator of social housing. They're never too impressed when your housing strategy is 2 or 3 years out of date. So the idea is to demonstrate that the authority is looking forward, that we are being proactive, and that we are responding positively to the inspection. So the key findings of the housing strategy, I don't think anyone would be surprised that there's obviously been things like demographic changes and numerical changes and statistical changes. But in many ways, the analysis is really surprisingly consistent since the last housing strategy was put together back in 2017. So the private sector remains the largest segment of the housing market. The largest sector is actually owner-occupiers, who are about 60-odd% of our local housing market. But owner-occupiers also have the poorest housing conditions and the poorest energy efficiency out of all the housing stock. And that's followed by the private rented sector. So although the housing strategy has to consider housing in all tenures, one of the problems we've got is that matters such as the private rented sector and the owner-occupied sector are things that come under the general fund. And also, our powers are limited when we're dealing with private sector housing. So the council basically has few powers and certainly few staff and little money to address these issues in the general fund. And out of the housing stock, the City Council owns about 8% of all the homes in the district, and 3% are owned by RPs. Sorry for the acronym. That's registered providers or housing associations, as they used to be known back in the day. And really, housing supply and affordability remain the key issues. Councillor.
When you say owner-occupier, is that someone who owns their own house? So how do we get involved with that? Sorry, because obviously it's their own property. It's up to them to update it if they need to. Thank you.
Well, at the moment, we don't. Back in the day, you'll probably recall that there used to be things like home improvement grants that used to be administered by local authorities. All of that has withered away over the years that I've been in housing. So they would be the natural levers that one would expect government might wish to pull, sort of thinking about if you're trying to improve energy efficiency across the whole housing stock, offering people grants and that sort of thing would be the obvious way to do it. And these things often used to be administered by the local council. So that's really what I mean, that there are issues within the private sector, there are issues within owner occupation, but we don't really have the money or the resources to do much about it. But we need to be aware of it because it affects the well-being of everyone in the district.
Marie, would you like to come in?
Just to add that, thank you, Chair. That being said, the City Council does capitalise on opportunities as they arise. So at the minute, you may be aware that we've got the Warmer Homes funding that's being distributed, and there are adverts out on the website. We're publicising this for owner-occupiers to apply for. And in addition to what Gary has said about the private rented sector, there is the Renters' Rights Act that's come into play, which has brought new powers, which many of you will have attended a recent councillor briefing on. And those powers and different approach is currently being planned.
Okay, thank you. So if we move on to some of the key findings, the first thing I thought we'd focus on is affordability. So affordability is one of the key issues in the district. And this slide looks at the property price to earnings ratios for the last sort of 3 to 4 years. And basically, in the most recent year, 2024, the housing price to earnings ratio was 9.6. So basically, 9.6 of someone's annual salary was what was required to pay for the median priced house. I suppose the caveat that one needs to put on these statistics is that very few people, say very few first-time buyers, would go into buying a median-priced house. Most people start off at a lower quartile house. And what these figures don't take into account is people working their way up a property ladder. They don't take into account, say, the bank of mum and dad or inheritances or anything like that. So it's really a straightforward statistical number crunch rather than necessarily dealing with some of the real world issues that people face in this. But it's a very interesting statistic. And basically as well, the median house price in the district is £340,000. So that's not the highest in the southeast. It's not the highest in Kent, but certainly it's amongst the highest in East Kent. We've got a comparison of rental costs and the incomes needed to pay for the rents. So I think really what we're looking at there, we've got in the second column the monthly costs, so that's the monthly rent, and then the third column says what that costs per annum and how much of someone's income would be required. We aim to try and keep that to about 30% because that's the government's guideline for affordability. So what this works out is those rents, if people spent about 30% of their income, how much income would be required to actually pay that rent?
Steph, could you use the mic? Thanks. Thank you.
When is that dated? That's not the last 5 years, surely.
Yes, that comes from the Housing Needs Assessment update of 2025. So obviously from that slide, what we see is that social rent is the cheapest and the most affordable in the district, so that someone would require an income of about £18,000. What this doesn't take into account, though, is anyone's eligibility for housing benefit, for universal credit, or any other welfare benefits. So again, this is a straightforward, straight line statistical number crunch. But what it does is it provides a degree of context, and it also puts some numbers to this government idea that people should only be spending about 30% of their income as an affordable proportion of their income to spend on their housing costs.
Councillor Dupe, carry on.
I'm really sorry, but that figure does need to be queried because I'd love to know a house for rent for that price. No, seriously, I would. Because I need one. That's not a realistic figure for even a one bed in Canterbury, unless it does include the entire district.
It does include the entire district. There is extensive information around the rentals in the district and the rental scale. So the average lower quartile rent is probably about £750 to £850 per month. But it depends what people are looking for, the type of size of property they're looking for, the locality. So, like I say, there's extensive information in the actual housing strategy itself, but there's also extensive information, more extensive, in the Housing Needs Assessment 2025, which is on the council's website in the evidence section of the draft local plan. So affordability by housing option.
Excuse me. Councillor.
Yeah, sorry to go on about this, but going back to what Steph said,
Yeah.
I have a 1-bedroom flat I rent out in Whitstable at 975 and a 3-bedroom house for 1400, and that is an average market rate. So if that medium is applying to approximately 3 bedrooms, I wouldn't know where to get something that cheap unless it was a really nasty rundown and no one wants to move into it. So I agree. I don't think them figures. Sorry.
Sorry. And I'm not doing it now. So we really need to. So could I go back and so Councillor Harvey, I think I heard what you were saying, but Councillor Dupe, I didn't hear your reply. So if you'd like to use the mic and say it again so that everyone can hear. Thank you.
I said if your house ever comes on the market, 1400 is a really good rate for a 3-bed house. So if it comes on the market, let me know, because it's probably got a better boiler than my house.
And thank you, Councillor Stockley.
Thank you. Just to add to that, it's the same in Thanet. The prices in Thanet are much higher, and I'd have thought they'd have been higher in the Canterbury district than Thanet.
I mean, I think that Gary Pesca has been really, really clear, because this, I remember this as we were working through the local plan. This is an update housing needs assessment, and that document is on our site under the draft local plan, the Reg 19. It was updated last year. Sorry, Gary, were you going to come back in with something else? Please do.
No, I was basically just going to say that these figures are averages. So they capture very high and very low to arrive at various figures. So as Councillor Edwards has referred to, there is extensive information in the housing needs assessment that's on the website. So they're not figures that officers have invented or anything. It's basically we've paid consultants to undertake quite in-depth work. And this housing needs assessment is an update on the previous one. So it's something that has been updated whilst the local plan has been developed. So that's where the numbers come from.
Thank you. Anybody else want to ask something at this point? Yeah, Councillor Thomas, yes.
I'm just wondering if it's taken in consideration of the new housings that has come into the district that some may be rented out. And I'm not really thinking this through. It's just popped into my head because obviously in Herne Bay we've had 3,000 houses built, or probably more than that. It's obviously those figures of the new properties, the new rentals, they've all configured into this new system, although some of those have only been built in the last year or so.
They should have captured that information. They're normally getting the information by looking at various websites, contacting estate agents, and really trying to understand what the rental market is doing at the moment. So that's how they get the figures. What we're looking at now, the orange slide, the colours don't have any particular significance, but really just so that we can tell the slides apart. What we've got, the different housing options: social rent, affordable rent, and various lower quartile rents and lower quartile house prices. And what that does is it assesses the basic household income that would be required to pay for those. And the final column basically indicates the percentage of all households that would be unable to afford that housing. Again, it doesn't take into account people's eligibility for things like housing benefit, local housing allowance, universal credit. So there are a number of variables, but this is really meant to illustrate the issues that we've got with affordability within the district. So some of the key findings about housing need and supply. On the 31st of March, this is the most recent figure that I gleaned that's publicly available, 1,356 households on the housing needs register. That's gone down slightly from October 2024 because the team are always trying to make sure that the housing needs register is up to date. But within 2024 and 25, just to put that into context, the council let 332 of its own vacant properties and also nominated people from the housing needs register to 222 housing association properties. Within 2025-26 thus far, we've had 1,600 homelessness approaches. There are 186 households in temporary accommodation as at May 2026. And registered providers or housing associations provided 1,400 new affordable homes from 2016 up to 2025. So they're far and away the largest provider of new affordable homes in the district. And the council built or acquired 232 new homes between 2010 and 2024, plus another 14 last year, which haven't yet been added into the statistics. But put that into context, over the same period, we lost 311 homes to the right to buy. So we're waiting for the new regulations about the right to buy to come into force, which will restrict access to it and also change the discount rates. So we're likely to see fewer purchases.
Gary, Councillor Heaver.
Yeah.
Very quick question of clarification, please, Gary. When the council built or acquired homes, 232, are they social rent homes or affordable rent homes?
They're a mixture of both. The recent ones that we've provided over the last 2 years have been affordable rent. The key driver for the choice between affordable rent and social rent is really about affordability to the council and whether something's financially viable to buy. In the main terms, the only income that the council has to repay the borrowing that it has to undertake to buy homes is rental income. And obviously affordable rents are much higher than social rents. The choice has to be made in the full knowledge that about 75% of our tenants are eligible for housing benefit or universal credit. So the government recently indicated that it would like a much higher percentage of new homes produced by councils and registered providers to be at social rent. But in order to enable that, the government, through Homes England, has to offer a much higher rate of capital grant. So everything is really dependent on the rate of capital grant that is offered to the council from Homes England. And that is outside our control. And when we're making an application to Homes England or any other form of government funding, really what it is a gap funding application. We say, if we charge X amount of rent, this is the gap. Can you provide grant to fill that? And they will either say yes or no. And obviously that gap varies whether you're charging social rent or affordable rent. So that's the rationale behind it.
Just a quick follow-up then. I'm sure we'll get into this later when you got through your presentation. But can we then assume from that that Canterbury City Council is not building council houses for social rent unless there's some change in government policy relating to the capital grants?
No, we can't say something as definite as that. We would like to build homes or acquire homes for social rent, but everything depends on the grant rate. So certain schemes, such as the Local Authority Housing Fund, is left to the discretion of the individual authority as to whether it would be social rent or affordable rent. But basically, it's not financially viable for us to charge social rent at the grant rate that the Ministry of Housing and Local Government is offering us. And they're expecting, if we want to charge social rent, we would have to put in an additional capital subsidy or subsidise it in a different way. And that might be by putting in commuted sums or something like that. So the more you subsidise a smaller number of houses to get a reduced rent, the fewer homes you can obviously afford in the grand scheme of things. And the rationale really behind thinking about affordable rents is that if someone is in the private rented sector or is threatened with homelessness and is on our housing needs register, the question is, would they rather be paying 100% of market rent, or would they rather be in some form of affordable housing where they're only paying 80% of market rent? And that's quite a tough decision, but it's one that we have to recognise we need to make as an authority.
Right. Next, Councillor Thomas wants to come in now. Thank you.
Yeah, I may have the figures wrong and I may have misunderstood something, but I can't remember how many new houses we've just proposed to build, which was great. I mean, I think you said 22, or but I can't remember. You said we just put planning in for new houses for the council. And sorry, I don't know the figures. But then that was in a meeting and done at full council, possibly 6 months ago. Great fanfare, brilliant. But recently we've sold 44 council houses. And that figure, I'm not 100% sure, but it's in my mind somewhere and it's been popped in my head. And so we're almost playing whack-a-mole, where we build one and we lose one, we build one, we lose three. And I'm just, the follow-up question is, when we have the right to buy, how much of that property worth comes back to the council to actually build more council houses?
Yes, yeah, we're in a transitional phase at the moment. The government has last year undertook consultation about right to buy and right to buy discounts. Previous governments had actually increased the levels of discount quite significantly. What we've got now is the government is proposing that brand new council homes will be excluded from the right to buy for a period of a number of years. I think it's 35 years from the top of my head. And the other discount rates are being lowered. So that is sort of changing. So the other element of this is that most registered providers weren't part of the right to buy regime. They were excluded from it. And that is why it's so important that we have nomination rights to housing association properties. So strategically, it's almost as good as us owning the properties, because they are being let to people on our housing register. So that's one of the key factors that we bear in mind.
Can I just confirm the sentence? When you say nominees, is that the word you use? That means we get first preference. Is that, yeah, it's English terms?
Yes, in effect, our clients, people on our housing waiting list, we nominate them. We put their names forward to those organisations, or they get a chance to bid for those properties.
Thanks. Next is Councillor Ricketts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gary. I would love you to get to the end, but I do have a question on right to buy, so I thought it was probably a moment to do it. I think you've probably largely answered it in that you probably can't answer it in that do you see a way in which that net loss of houses to right to buy will come down, or do you foresee that happening with these changes coming in? And the other one is I assume affordable rent homes are part of the right to buy scheme as well. So on that basis, it doesn't make a difference if we do more affordable or social rent in terms of right to buy.
Okay, dealing with the affordable rent homes first, they are part of the right to buy regime, but it's worth emphasising that even affordable rent homes are between 60 and 80% of market rent. So they're well below market rent, and that's inclusive of service charges. So they're normally well below the market rents. That's worth emphasising. As I've already said, we're in a bit of a state of flux at the moment. We're waiting for all the final guidance to come out from the Ministry of Housing around the new right to buy regime. As we've already said, we're expecting new homes to be exempt from the right to buy in future. There is a political aspiration of the council to try and make sure that we have more council homes than we started with. But we're running to catch up. There is quite a large section in the draft housing strategy on how we propose to try and fill the gap. And the obvious thing to do straight away is what we've been doing now with temporary accommodation, is to run acquisition programs. But that's quite labour intensive because if you're buying one house, you've got to go through all the usual rigmarole of the legal process. The alternative is similar to what we did at the Woodlands at Sturry, which is to buy in bulk. We stepped in as the registered provider of last resort on that development, and we bought the Section 106 affordable rent homes. So we're negotiating with a number of developers now to try and buy in bulk, and also separately to see if there are opportunities for us to buy properties off the shelf, more or less whole small developments, which would then be subject to us getting grant from Homes England. So there are a number of things that we're trying to do to increase the number of council homes, with the reassurance, fingers crossed, that they will end up being exempt from the right to buy for a fairly long period of time.
Thank you. And Councillor Mackenzie was next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just to add on that, like point about right to buy, Gary's already mentioned the 35-year wait on new builds, but also like that policy is changing it so that people living in council homes have to live in it for 10 years up from free before they can buy their council house. So those factors combined will at least slow down the loss of council houses, I presume, and help us to some extent to keep pace with the loss. So what I was going to ask is, I know that this policy is still going through Parliament. It was only just introduced in the King's Speech. It has grounds to change as it goes through Parliament. Are we able to add it to our strategy now, or can it be amended at some point, or will it have to come to a future housing strategy once this one has expired?
Right. I'm afraid my crystal ball is a bit misty this evening. Everything is obviously going to be a matter of timing with it actually going through the due process in Parliament, and also to see what compromises have to be made to get that through. I would suggest that, depending on when we need to bring it through, I don't think it probably needs an amendment to the housing strategy, because last year I think we ended up selling about 14 homes or 8 homes on the right to buy. The number was that sort of figure. I looked it up today. So it's not really a mega amount. However, when the government announced that it was going to make the changes and consult, what that did was it brought forth a whole load of applications from people who thought, oh my God, I better apply now while the discount rates are still high. So I think the council probably received about 6 months worth of applications in the space of a few weeks. But that's absolutely nothing compared to colleagues that I've been speaking to in London boroughs who had received 5 years worth of applications within that time. So, you know, that is the situation. I suppose it's one of the unforeseen consequences of making an announcement in advance without perhaps thinking through that there might be consequences. So, you know, we're at where we're at with that one. So it's quite a difficult situation, I think. So, sorry.
Well, sorry, had you finished? Councillor Butcher next, thank you.
Do we still purchase council housings when they're the right to buy? I bought my council house for 10,000 and now it's worth 250,000. Do we still buy the council houses from people?
The answer is yes and no. Right. What I mean by that is that for a number of years, we have a right of first refusal. So people have to, if they want to sell within a certain number of years, they have to offer it back to us first. Whether we purchase depends on whether we've got an acquisition scheme or some sort of growth scheme on the go. And you'll probably recall that over the years, we've had 2 rounds of local authority housing fund grant. We're now about to enter another round of local authority housing fund grant. On those, we focused on buying back former council homes, simply because they were the most cost-effective way of achieving our aim. They're basically lower quartile value properties in terms of the housing market. And if they're flats, we own the freehold of the block, etc., etc. So there are a lot of advantages to us buying back our former stock. The other thing to say in terms of anything we buy or anything we build, if someone applies under the right to buy, there's something called the cost floor. So it means that they cannot buy it for less than it cost us to purchase it and maybe refurbish it and all our overheads and anything that we've spent on it in the meantime. So it means that we should get all our money back. And particularly with the newer properties, thinking of places like the Woodlands, Parham, those sort of places, they're comparatively expensive compared to our existing council housing. So with the cost floor, it's more likely to deter people from buying. There's less financial advantage while those properties are still relatively new in the housing stock. So it's complicated. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Band.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, it's clearly we need to do all we can to increase the ability of the council to actually purchase or build its own homes. But I'm looking at the figures that you've got currently on the slide there and comparing them to the figures that you showed earlier around affordability in terms of median income and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering whether there is in any of the, I mean, we're talking here about a need of building 12, 15 new homes a year, which is quite a high figure. And that's presumably because of the size of the population and the growth in the population, and that's known. So is there any evidence, because of the problems with the median income and affordability issue, bearing in mind that Canterbury stubbornly remains the second worst area in the whole of Kent for resident worker income, is there any evidence of a drift to self-build, people building their own houses in order to make it more affordable for them. That's one thing. And if self-build is a way to enable some people to actually build their own house, should it be part of our housing strategy to look at how the council can assist or advise such endeavours? And secondly, is there much evidence at all about community land trust building of homes in the district? Again, because community land trust is a way of reducing the cost of housing. And again, same question, is there a role in the housing strategy as a whole for enabling community land trust development?
Community land trusts. I can remember being involved in sort of trying to get something off the ground around those quite a number of years ago. And one of the issues we've got is that they're a very long-term project to try and put together, to get people interested, to find land, etc. It's quite complex, and it's a slow burn, and it's not an easy win. Going on to the self-build, there is a section within the draft housing strategy on self-build and custom build. The council's obliged to have a register of people that register an interest in a self-build plot. Doesn't mean that we have to supply them with one, but they register their interest. And in concert with the draft local plan, we are trying to make sure that really as part of the overall mix, that plots are available on some of the strategic developments within the local plan to pick up and make available sort of self-build plots. I mean, in saying that, in terms of being an answer to the overall housing need, in all honesty, it's probably going to be quite a niche sort of response to housing needs, but it will help some people. I think what we've found in the past, where we've tried to facilitate people buying plots by looking at the Housing Revenue Account's own land holdings, is that the land that we own at the moment is often fairly compromised. It's fairly small plots on existing housing estates and that sort of thing. Whereas we're getting, we went through a phase of people coming forward who seem to have sort of like dreams of sort of like a yurt village, or you know, sort of like grand designs and things like that. So people were coming to us with sort of quite strong aspirations that our plots weren't really in a position to answer. But hopefully we can arrive at a more practical solution through under the auspices of the draft local plan. So yes, you're picked up on the fact that the housing needs assessment says that overall in all tenures we need 1,215 new homes a year. So of those, they're saying that 695 per annum need to be affordable housing. So the results of the consultation. We had a 12-week consultation period from 12th of January to the 15th of April. And the consultation team targeted organisations, stakeholder groups, individuals, representative bodies, statutory consultees, and neighbouring local authorities and registered providers. So hundreds of invitations were sent out. Of those, we received 40 responses. Doesn't sound very good when you're sending out sort of 500 or 600 requests, but compared to many of the other consultations that we've had, that's pretty good. 39 of those were from residents of the district. One was from a developer, And really, I was a bit surprised, none from our registered provider partners who we work with. I would have expected at least some degree of interest or attempt to influence policy. But saying that, our policies aren't sort of like outliers in terms of being unusual or anything like that. So, you know, we're at where we're at with that. We had one written representation from the Alliance of Canterbury Residents Associations, and the Residents Engagement Panel was briefed on the 19th of May. So they're our council tenants. And the 5 members of that group completed the same questionnaire that we'd had on the website and sent out. So with all of that consultation, there was no new evidence or data received really to affect the underlying analysis. What I did receive were really a number of things where I felt I needed to put some clarification into the draft housing strategy. So the document that you've had this time is slightly different from the one that was produced in February, apart from the fact it takes into account a lot of the draft local plan stuff. It also takes into account what residents were saying. And there was a lot of misapprehension about the relative role of the housing strategy vis-a-vis the local plan, as though the housing strategy was the document that allocated sites for development and planned for infrastructure and all of those sort of things. So I've tried to respond to what the public were telling us within the document. One of the key questions that we asked the public was, what do they think our housing priorities ought to be in the district? So this isn't the whole shopping list that we gave. I've narrowed it down to the top votes. So the public's main choice was empty homes. And in the draft housing strategy, I'm sure we'll remember, Canterbury City Council is classified as a medium performer in terms of local authorities. So when we haven't got a huge number of empty homes, and I suspect that choice, and it's only my gut feeling, I've got no evidence for this, I suspect that choice is probably a reflection of more that it seems like, shall we call it, the common sense approach, rather than sort of like an evidence-based one. But interestingly, the public also, their second choice was about new affordable homes for rent and improving existing council homes. Interesting to compare that with the Residents' Engagement Panel, our council tenants, and not surprisingly, their first choice was new affordable homes for rent. And that was equal with housing for older people. So it's not that long ago that we were considering the report on the older persons accommodation review. So their choices are probably a little bit out of kilter with the evidence that we've seen over the last sort of 6 months. But I think it's interesting, and what it does do is it tells us about people's thinking. But I think one of the key takeaways for me is that most of the respondents, somewhere high on their list, the new affordable homes for rent and improving the quality of existing council homes were a couple of the key factors that they saw as priorities. We also asked them directly about whether they supported the idea of more council homes. So with the public responses, if we add the strongly support and support together, that's 67.5% support the idea of more council housing. And the rep response was, well, 80% of them want more council housing. So again, there is, although it's a fairly small sample, I think the response is quite strong that they want more council housing. And we also asked them what type of affordable homes they thought were most needed. Obviously, within the housing needs assessment, this is really driven more by demographics, by the type of households that we've got on the housing needs register. So it's really driven by evidence. But we've asked for what the public thought. Interestingly, the general public opted much more for family homes, 2 and 3 bedroom houses, but also thought what was important was supported housing for vulnerable people. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing there. With REP, their first choice for the type of housing we need was bungalows. So it's an interesting choice. That's probably more of an aspirational choice because in terms of affordable housing, bungalows are quite land hungry. You know, the space for one bungalow, you could probably fit 4 flats on it. So in practical terms and in viability terms, it's not really that viable. But also the idea of supported housing for vulnerable people was also one of their priorities.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is the 40 people that filled in the questionnaires, yeah? Now, I've been a councillor for 10 years and my sister's got a job for supporting vulnerable adults. And actually, there's quite a lot in Herne Bay, which they would know nothing about, because I didn't know nothing about it until probably 6 months ago. So it's difficult to judge what 40 people have coming up with that is a very narrow demographics of people that, and I don't wish to be rude, but don't really know what's going on in the district.
Yes, and probably for a lot of people, their choice may be driven by personal experience, like the public are talking about the need for 2 and 3 bedroom homes. It may be that they've got sons and daughters or grandchildren who need a home. One of the things that we've got to do as a council and that is referenced in the draft housing strategy is that we're going to be obliged to prepare a supported housing strategy, which needs to take into account things like supported housing for vulnerable people. So we will be looking at that in much more depth as a separate topic this year. It's something that the government's requiring us to do. I don't think that the actual full guidance has yet been issued. So it's something that I suspect that we'll be coming back to Overview Committee with in due course on that particular subject.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That just made me think about another question I had set aside. So we spoke about the changes to right to buy earlier. In the same piece of legislation that's a part of, there's another policy on domestic abuse to make it easier for those who domestically abuse their partner to be evicted, so that the victim doesn't have to leave the community and support network. Is that something that we are anticipating as a council, that we are preparing for? Maybe not factoring into the strategy, because you said we don't have to amend it at this stage, but is it something we're prepared for, I guess, is what I'm asking. Thank you.
Yes, certainly we're looking at sort of domestic abuse accreditation so that we will make sure that within the district that we're adhering to the latest government guidelines, etc. And also the tenancy strategy and the tenancy policy also specifically reference survivors of domestic abuse, and that if they do, that basically the focus is on enabling them to remain in their social or affordable home, if that's where they live, or if they have to move for any reason, that they're offered a tenancy of the same status as the one that they left behind, so that they're not disadvantaged legally in any way. So we're trying to pick up all the various strands, and I'm sure that this will be probably addressed in much more detail in the homelessness and rough sleepers strategy also as we progress.
Councillor Buckman, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things on this list here. Just about adapted housing. Is there any particular target for the amount of adapted housing that you want to attain to? And then secondly, it goes back to a previous slide. Now, you said about homelessness approaches and people on the housing register. Do you keep data on people who aren't accepted as homeless and aren't accepted onto the housing register? I just wondered if you kept figures on that. Thanks.
Yeah, if you really have trouble getting to sleep at night, the local authority housing statistics provide a wealth of information about things like homelessness approaches, the number that were accepted, the reason why they've approached the council, and the outcomes. So there's a wealth of information available. So we do keep all of that information. So we've got access to that, because basically we have to supply all the information to the government for it to go on the website. So that's done annually. So one can do a year-on-year analysis of how things are changing. What was your other question? Sorry.
That first bit was handy, because I guess that even though they don't make it, they're not accepted, it doesn't necessarily mean, they just fail the criteria for housing. No, the second one was about, have you got any targets for adapted housing, or is it just sort of more of an ad hoc basis?
In terms of our existing homes, it's really driven by the needs. There is a process. So referral by occupational therapists, seek their advice, etc., etc. There obviously has to be a balance between the extent of works that you undertake to someone's home to enable them to stay put, compared to whether it might be better to offer them a more appropriate property if one becomes available. So there is that balance, and it depends on the extent of the works, the adaptability of the property, and quite frankly also how much budget the council has got to play with. In terms of our newer homes, it's probably a little bit more cut and dried, because all the new homes that we're buying, such as at the Woodlands, they all have level access. So it's obstacle-free access to the ground floor on the houses, the flats, etc. And a proportion of new built homes have to be built to basically accessible standards, but also a percentage, I think it's 5%, have to be built to wheelchair standards. So within the framework, there is scope for that, and that draft housing strategy picks up on those percentages. And interestingly enough, most of the people that need adaptations or who see themselves as disabled are also our older residents in the district. So there's a joining there together of the statistical and demographic data that is mainly older people who need the adaptations. I suppose it's blindingly obvious, but yeah. Right, our policy responses. The focus obviously has to be on where the City Council can actually influence the outcomes. We spoke right at the beginning about owner-occupiers, private rented sector, etc., etc. There are certain things where we're not going to have much sway and we're not going to be able to achieve much. So we've just got to be honest with ourselves. And a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what's in the draft housing strategy is driven by changing expectations of the government, by statute and by regulation. And the responses really are cross-service. And one of the things I would say, keep on mentioning it, is that it's facilitated really in a large part by the Regulation 19 Draft Local Plan. So things like the development of new affordable housing, et cetera, the local plan is absolutely critical for us. So what will we be doing in terms of housing supply and affordability? First of all, we've got to recognise the key role of the private development sector. One of the things that came out of the public consultation was an underlying antipathy towards the development of new homes in the district. Probably won't come as a big surprise, but that is one of the key drivers for us getting new affordable housing, whether that's council housing or housing association homes. One of the important things that we do is working with registered providers, housing associations, to provide more affordable homes. So liaising with them, working between them and our development control and developers to try and make sure we get the homes we need in the district so that they're the right size and in the right location and the right type. We're also looking at trying to increase the number of council homes, which we've spoken about. But within the draft local plan, there's also the aspiration around area and estate regeneration opportunities. Basically because a lot of our stock is probably 60 years old at least. It doesn't use land very efficiently. So there may be opportunities. Now's the time to start looking strategically at some of those areas or some types of housing to see if it's appropriate to start planning for some sort of regeneration. Obviously made more complex by the fact that the right to buy, about which we've spoken at length, means that housing areas are pepper potted with different tenures. So it's not a straightforward thing to do. Also, we're trying to offer support for the strategic development at Wincheap that's in the draft local plan. So, and what I mean by doing that is by expressing a willingness as a housing revenue account to maybe buy some of those homes on that development that are produced for Section 106 for affordable housing, or maybe even to think about buying homes off the shelf if we can get Homes England grant to support that. So existing homes and the private sector, we're trying to encourage the efficient use of existing affordable housing by encouraging mobility, people right-sizing, encouraging mutual exchanges, that sort of thing. And trying to improve the quality of existing council homes. There is a stock condition survey that I know we've spoken about at various times, looking to improve the quality of council housing, but also to try and decarbonise the stock, etc. Our private sector team are looking to implement the Renters' Rights Act, which was enacted in May. We've spoken about promoting self-build and custom build. And also, we're looking at taking a pragmatic approach to the conversion of redundant commercial premises. A lot of the time, there's not a lot you can do about it because basically there are permitted development rights.
Cheers, Gary. I was just going to ask about the Renters' Rights Act. So, like, it's coming to effect for the private sector already, but next year in October, it's going to apply to social housing as well. How is that going to affect us, and has that been baked into the strategy? Thank you.
Yes, well, the strategy recognises that we're going to be affected, and depending on the extent of what happens, that will depend on what our response is. Basically, in the first instance, the Renters' Rights Act basically abolishes assured short hold tenancies per se. What it does do is it sets to one side the social housing sector. So it's really focusing at the moment on the private rented sector and assured short hold tenancies. So people will basically be offered assured tenancies. So that's tenancies that aren't fixed term, but are rolling tenancies. Now, as a local authority, we don't offer assured tenancies or assured short hold tenancies. By law, we offer secure tenancies and various derivatives of those, like introductories and that sort of thing. However, our introductory tenancies are fixed term. Tenancies that are what they call demoted are also fixed term. That means if people have had some of their rights removed by the court. So they are fixed term. We know that the government has issued a directive to the regulator of social housing to come up with a new tenancy standard regarding the Renters' Rights Act and fixed term tenancies. At this stage, we're not sure how far they're going to go. And although the Renters' Rights Act talks specifically about assured short hold tenancies, we don't know whether the regulator is also going to sweep up our fixed term introductory tenancies and demoted tenancies within that standard or not. So we really don't know what the outcome is going to be. And I think it's basically about October 2027, we're expecting that standard to be published. So I'll keep you posted. So hopefully drawing towards a conclusion, I think everyone would be glad to go and get a cup of tea. Right, so in summary, the changes that we've had since the 12th of February, we've undertaken some redrafting to reflect the extensive consultation process. There's been no new evidence to alter the analysis, but it was clear that some clarifications were required because people didn't necessarily quite understand either the terminology or the role of different strategies that the council produces. The key issues for us, really, as a strategic housing authority, remain housing supply and affordability. That's what they were in 2017. That's what they were for the housing strategy before that. And we've also had to alter the draft to take into account changing national policies and statutes, such as the Renters' Rights Act, such as the rent convergence coming into force. Loads of things have been happening since we published that document in December. And also the key thing that I've had to pick up is that the Regulation 19 draft local plan was published. So what I have done is make sure that the two documents are completely aligned. And going through, you probably have picked up the fact that a lot of local plan policies are directly referenced in the housing strategy, just to make sure that we've got that alignment. And the purpose of that is also to show to the planning inspectorate that the two documents are aligned and that the draft local plan is deliverable. So that was one of the key things that we wanted to get across as a council. So the next steps that we've got is obviously to consider feedback from Overview Committee. And I've also got to check for any statistical updates that have been slipped through so that I can make sure that the information is as up to date as possible before we go through the final approval process. So I'll assess the need for changes or amendments, which I'll have to do very quickly. And also develop a very focused but short action plan, which will really only cover us for the next 2 to 3 years because of local government reorganisation. And the next stage for this document is that it goes to Cabinet, hopefully for approval on the 2nd of July. Oh, sorry, 30th of June. Yes, yeah, I forgot my, yes, the date for Cabinet has changed. So since this, it's been brought forward a couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a comprehensive report. And before we start taking questions, I would like to propose that we recommend to Cabinet that the Draft Housing Strategy 2026-2030 is approved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. And now we open the debate. So if people, yeah, I'll start with Councillor Old.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gary, for a fantastic report. It's a work of reference, and it deserves, indeed, demands to be read by every councillor because it's of such great importance to people in the district. I'm interested in the 695 figure for the number of affordable houses that required to be built. And in asking this question, I know your reply is going to be a bit speculative, so I make allowances for that. So the 695 figure, is that required to keep pace with new admissions to the Housing Needs Register to account for demographic change, or is it going to make any inroads into the backlog of the number of people we've got on the register?
Right. As you would expect, we have to, the calculation is done according to a very complex and convoluted process that is standard to all local authorities. So to get that consistency, but it does take into account the backlog. It takes into account newly forming households. So it's taken into account all the demographics, and it also looks at our housing needs register. So the calculation itself is actually shown in quite some detail on the web page for the draft local plan in the housing needs assessment. It actually contains the calculation itself. So I've not replicated it in the local plan, in the draft housing strategy, simply because I didn't want to duplicate the document that was already in the public domain. But yes, it does pick up really all of those issues that you've just raised, Councillor.
Thank you. If I could just come back. You mentioned that there are two aspects to this. You mentioned housing supply and affordability. And of course, the local plan only addresses one aspect of that. The local plan only addresses the issue of housing supply and does nothing about affordability. And the truth is that the housing crisis we've got locally, as this report excellently demonstrates, is that the housing crisis we have is a housing crisis of affordability over supply. And unless we do something to address the issues of affordability, we'll never get ahead of ourselves, and just building more and more houses and putting more and more concrete over our green spaces is not going to do anything to deal with that issue. So thank you.
I don't know whether you want to make any comment on the local plan addressing affordability, but I mean, obviously it does in its own way. And in the, so Gary, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, yeah, I'd only say that the local plan within the confines of its remit seeks to address affordability by the number of affordable homes and the percentage of affordable homes on developments. So looking for 35% of all new developments to be some form of affordable housing, looking for a split where 70% are either social or affordable rent and the remaining 30% are shared ownership. So within the confines of its purpose, it tries to address some of those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Heaver, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Gary, for the report. So much information and that really helpful and a great reference for councillors. I'd like to drill down a bit of detail on the same point Councillor all made about affordability. And my particular concern about the report is, as alluded to before, social rent housing. And I know everybody's guilty of conflating council housing with social rent housing with affordable housing, and they're all subtly different, as I'm learning quickly. I just want to draw your attention to page 37, which is talking about the RPs, or registered providers, and my worry is that they're not providing social rent housing and haven't been and won't be doing so in the future. If you look at the figures, your figures for last year, only, I think, 29 social new rent homes completed last year out of 535. So that's about 5.5%. And clearly a huge balance going towards shared ownership. And I've got a lot of my residents in my ward of Whitstable Heights, and a lot of people living in shared ownership accommodation, really unhappy and feel very ripped off because they're paying, of course, rent for the bit they don't own and paying a mortgage with bits they do. And if anybody mentioned to them that they were very lucky to be living in affordable housing, they might get quite short shrift. So I've got a worry on the one hand, and also you say in the report on a number of occasions how there's a lack of appetite for S106, particularly small housing. So there's another cause for concern. And then what you were saying before seemed to give the impression that the council's preference is probably more for affordable rent than social rent because of the financial realities and for government policy. And then my alarm bells really started ringing even more when you get to page 42 of your report, which actually is one of the key changes from the February version, where the mix of affordable housing for development sites, which was 30% on brownfield and on greenfield, is now only 15% on brownfield. And it talks about the social and affordable homes program and its preference for 60% of all affordable homes to be funded to be social rent. So as a novice, I'm thinking social rent housing is what we really need if we're going to address affordability. And then the housing needs assessment, the council's own housing needs assessment says that 80% should be affordable or social rent. So I'm not thought this really should be our strategic priority. And yet, when you get to the nitty gritty, only 10% of new developments will be allocated for social rent as a minimum. So a quick sum: if it's a brownfield site, for every 1,000 new homes we build in this district in the local plan, please correct me if I'm wrong, it won't be the first time. Of 1,000 homes, new homes built in Canterbury districts on a brownfield site, 150 will be affordable, but of those 150 so-called affordable, 90 will be affordable rent, which actually I think Canterbury Housing Advice Centre tells me are not actually affordable for most people, and 45 will be shared ownership. So we'll be building 1,000 houses to get 5 social rent homes. I think that's right. No, I do apologise. 1,000 homes for 15 social rent homes, and if it's a greenfield site, 30. So that's is that right?
Let's address the brownfield issue first. That is a local plan policy. So what I'm doing there is actually referencing the local plan policy, so that when colleagues in development management are negotiating the percentage of affordable homes on a site, that is the percentage, the minimum percentage that they will be trying to achieve. Now, the government in the Social and Affordable Homes Programme has got an aspiration or a target for 60% of new homes to be social rent. But as I've said before, achieving that depends on the Social and Affordable Homes Programme being able to offer sufficient grant through Homes England to enable that to happen. So in effect, the grant is a form of subsidy. So simply the social rent, our social rents, the council rents that we charge, are probably only about 40 to 50% of market rent. So that, in terms of paying the bills, paying the loans that you have to take out to build new homes, and also paying for the ongoing housing management and maintenance, unless you get a big capital subsidy right at the beginning, the rent is potentially too low really to pay all those costs. So it's not a choice as in terms of it is not our preference to build affordable rent instead of social rent. I think our preference as a local authority is for social rent because it's much more affordable. It means that people aren't relying so much on the benefit system. But the reason why the local plan policy says that it expects a minimum of 10% of new homes to be social rent is because the grant and the subsidy system is completely outside the council's control. So if we put in an aspiration there of 60%, and I know now that Homes England, the social and affordable homes programme, is oversubscribed. So anyone coming in now who says, well, we want to buy Section 106 homes on a development, unless they've actually got all their funding lined up and all their ducks in a row, they probably won't get funding for social rent housing. So we're trying to sort of square a circle here, really, that we've got an aspiration for 60%, but achieving that and paying for it isn't within our gift. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we do at least get some form of affordable housing built that the housing associations or the council can actually afford to build.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I know I've asked a few questions already, but I was going to start off by saying thank you, Gary, for the report. It is a really good report, and I really enjoyed reading it. I had another two questions. I really welcome the section on the empty homes. It's something that a lot of my residents have brought up many times, so I was quite pleased to read about that section. I was going to ask, so out of the total 2,466 vacant homes, it does say that 82 of them are council homes. So apologies if I've missed this anywhere in the report, but like, what are we doing to bring them back into use and make them not vacant anymore? Is what I was going to ask. Like if they are houses belonging to us. And also, I was going to ask, like, do we know what the revenue raised from the extra premiums on the council tax of vacant homes? Do we know how that revenue is used, where it goes? Because it seems to me like it might be a good idea, if possible, if the budget allows, because I don't know at the moment, to channel it back into the HRA to help us boost our housing stock, if that's something we can do.
So dealing with the empty homes premium first, that is really it's a general fund income. So unfortunately, you can't swap income between the general fund and the housing revenue account. So it would be nice to have some sort of first dibs at it, but you know, in reality, it's not going to happen. The number of long-term council homes that are empty has come down quite significantly. There is an officer working group that meets once a fortnight to go through long-term empty homes that are council owned, and I'm not sure what the current figure is, but it's a lot lower than 88. So that's probably one of the statistics that I will need to update between now and the report going to Cabinet.
Thank you. And the next councillor is Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, yeah, I've mentioned this before. Basically, when we talk about upgrading the council stock, I've mentioned this before, but basically we have to be careful about heat source pumps, because it's always mentioned green and every government's one of them, but they are expensive to run if you've not got efficiency, because the price of electricity is cheaper than it's dearer than the gas, so it doesn't become cost effective unless you've got solar panels and you go down that route. And on a supplementary on that, I was at Cabinet on Cabinet on Tuesday, and it was mentioned that the next Cabinet will be on Thursday, the 2nd of July, and it's written in here. But when are you saying it's on now?
we were notified today that it's been amended to the 30th of June.
Okay.
So
Can that be circulated? Because if that changes, I need to organise my diary.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pip.
I believe that's only happened today. So as soon as we've got confirmation, we will of course let you know.
Okay. How would we let the public know that? Because this is already in the public domain.
Well, we'll change it on the online, on the notice board.
Okay, that's fine. That's
yeah,
fine.
so as soon
When's
as
the next date? Sorry, the 30th of June.
30th of June is what I believe it will be.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Sorry. Next person is Councillor Ricketts. I've got you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Gary. I think as we've highlighted tonight, you're sort of working within a system that you clearly understand very, very well, but you've got sort of one hand tied behind your back while trying to deliver the best strategy for residents. And I think that's something that when we actually consider the paper in front of us, you have to consider the sort of playing field that you're playing on here. And I think we would all we'd all love to be in a world where you were allowed to go and spend as much money as you wanted on delivering the houses that met that need criteria. However, given the fact that that isn't the case, and I mean, my initial thought in reading through this is it is a strategy to a certain extent, but as you've mentioned, you've got that 2 to 3 year action plan, and I would normally expect to see something with a bit more concrete action in the strategy. But I think you've explained tonight the reasons why you can't put that in here, because you need to know what's going to come from central government. And I think in judging this and looking the way forward, I think it feels broadly that and actually I think that you can see how the strategy has worked by looking at some of the figures within there. And I know certainly when I was first elected as a councillor, we were looking at housing waiting lists and the housing needs register that was getting close towards 3,000, and the fact that that's almost half of where it is in the time that I've been a councillor, I think is a testament to the hard work of you and your department. That although that is still a large figure, that it does show the direction of travel is good. And I think that this strategy, and clearly some of the things, as you mentioned, with the stuff at Woodlands and Sturry and those kind of acquisitions, I think have been really fantastic work. Again, within that realms of what you can do, and let's hope that there is some serious commitment from central government to deliver that kind of capital grant that will allow us to put more social housing rather than affordable housing into that to tackle that number. So I think, in general, given this incredibly detailed document and looking forward to seeing what that action plan will be when those other factors come in, I think that it does show that that we are moving in the right direction, and I think that this will continue us moving in the right direction. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that you really want to get that figure down into as close as we possibly can to zero. Although, unfortunately, I doubt we will ever get there. But I think that this is a fantastic document, and broadly based on tonight, I can't think of anything that I would do to amend it within the constraints that we have. So I think I would probably support recommending this to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Forrester.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry, Gary, I can't see you at all. I'm talking to a pillar. But thank you for your presentation, which I could hear. I just wanted to turn to page 47, which relates to student housing needs. But actually, my question's about HMOs, because it seems slightly confusing to me that HMOs were only referred to in the context of student housing needs. And indeed, Article 4 was developed to address those needs and avoid an overpopulation of student HMOs within the district. That would seem to be quite a localised issue. Indeed, it affects mostly my ward in St Stephen's at the base of at the bottom of the hill of the university. However, even in that ward, that demographic seems to be changing. And that's reflected in the next section on care leavers, which talks about how we don't have publicly available information about the number of care leavers who may well present quite similarly to some students in age and demographics, but that their housing needs may take many forms, such as shared housing. So I just wanted to question whether the information about HMOs primarily as a student form of housing is still accurate, how up to date that data is, and if there has been any change in the demographics that this will reflect and look to address. Thank you.
Right. As you rightly point out, in the text, we truly at the moment do not have any published data on things like care leavers, unaccompanied child asylum seekers, people like that who are probably living within the HMO sector. And also sort of often vulnerable people who are living in some form of supported housing are also often living in the HMO sector. But that often tends to be concentrated in certain localities. One of the things that we've got to do that ought to take into account some of the non-student HMOs is we've got to produce a supported housing strategy. And I believe the timetable is basically that we'll have to start this year on that document. So we're waiting for the final guidance to be published, but it should start addressing issues around the housing of care leavers and that sort of thing. I mean, primarily the responsibility rests with Kent County Council as sort of like the corporate parent, but obviously over the course of time it does have ramifications potentially for the city council as people get older and they trying to become more independent. So I think there's another piece of work to be done henceforth on the supported housing strategy that needs to capture some of these issues about shared housing, housing for vulnerable people, and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Auld.
Thank you, Chair. Just carrying on the issue of student accommodation, I realise that the building regulations or the way that student accommodation is built doesn't necessarily lend itself to being used for other purposes very often. But I suppose I want some reassurance that if there is a lot of vacancies in student accommodation up at the university, are we in contact with them? Are there things that we can do to make use of that asset? Because I walked through the university recently and found there are some whole blocks there that are unoccupied at the moment. And I think the number of students is subject to quite short-term fluctuations. And so it really ought to be something that I hope that we can take advantage of should that become available. I just want some reassurance that we're in some discussions with universities about that. Thank you.
Yes, we do try and stay in liaison with the universities. I mean, long term, it's been one of those issues that we've been only too aware of. And initially, that came about because of the fact that so many students were living in the community and the issue of HMOs and insufficient amount of purpose-built student accommodation. So from experience, the universities aren't so keen on renting out to other people the blocks that are actually on campus for obvious reasons. But what we are finding is that some of the more peripheral accommodation, if we think about things like the Parham Student Village, properties are starting to become vacant there. They were initially leased by people like Christ Church University en bloc. Now, those leases, some of those have been coming to an end. So compared to the purpose-built accommodation, places like Parham are much more peripheral, and also compared to the quality of the new accommodation, they're quite dated. So students are voting with their feet, really. And as far as possible, the local plan is encouraging new purpose-built student accommodation either to be built on campus or within a few minutes of the campus. So it's really trying to sort of like target that. And the new purpose-built student accommodation, the local plan asks for it to be convertible into ordinary housing with a degree of ease. Whereas what we've found in the past with some of the oldest student housing is it's been quite difficult to convert to provide family homes or even sort of self-contained accommodation. So I think the situation is improving, and it's something that we're trying to monitor. And we do also have conversations with companies that own the leased student accommodation with a view to seeing whether it is feasible for the council to either buy or lease some of that accommodation, and whether there's a deal to be done.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Butcher is next. Thank you. Jean, could you use the mic, please?
Sorry. On Lone Road Estate, we have the co-op housing. Is that something we could look at, or is it not possible? It's just an idea that co-op housing would be beneficial.
Right. Over the years, we've had conversations with the sort of like the governing body that deals with co-ops to see whether we can make contact with various people. We have been in touch with the Franklin Road co-op, and also there's another co-op that operates down in South Street or East Street. So we have been in contact with them, and we've tried to facilitate them developing more accommodation. A lot of the co-ops tend to be very small and targeted at certain groups. And certainly in the conversations that I had with the Franklin Road Co-op, it almost seemed to be a very tight-knit group of residents. And because we approached them with a view to maybe doing a land deal with them so they could develop more homes, but we would have wanted nomination rights to some of those homes. And they were a bit reluctant to sort of do that. So it never really came to fruition, but we're always open to sort of talking to these organisations about doing that. And it's in our interests, as far as possible, to widen the pool of registered providers that we're working with, whether they be co-ops or more standard housing associations.
We've got the older person's housing needs, student housing needs, care leavers, unaccompanied asylum seeker children, gypsies and travellers. Do we have a policy on veterans?
Not per se, other than the housing allocation scheme. The housing allocation scheme does actually give additional preference to veterans. So that is where we address their housing needs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. If you put your mic,
Yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas, thank you.
Just to declare an interest, Chair, I do work for Lead and Lettings, and they do student accommodation. People want a conversation, just covering myself. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, do you want to come back in? Thank you.
I don't know if I need to, but I probably should declare an interest that I work for a local homelessness charity that provides supported accommodation. I just realised.
That's fine. Thank you. That seems to be the end of the contributions. Councillor Heaver.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just come back on a couple of other concerns I have about it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to support the recommendation to Cabinet this evening, although I do completely accept what Councillor Rickett said, that people are working with hands tied behind their back, and it's a very difficult territory. But at the end of the day, to have a housing strategy that, even though it's connected to the local plan and it's not your local plan, I completely understand that, that says that all of the affordable housing we're going to build in this district, only 10% of it is going to be for social rent, isn't something I can support. I'm sorry about that. The other more pragmatic concerns I had were another point that's raised about empty homes, and that's going up 19%. And I know that many other Kent boroughs, Gravesham, Thanet and Dartford have a team or a dedicated officer to try and get houses back into use. Is that something that would happen at Canterbury or would be considered or could be part of the strategy?
The problem that we've got is that it's a general fund task to deal with empty homes. And as we all know, the general fund is very financially constrained. And at the moment, there's no funding allowed within this year's budget for an empty homes officer.
Thank you. Sounds like no. And one quick other one, just page 39 about the private rental sector and the lack of, it's another change from the February version, that there's no control for the local council over private rental rates, which of course there isn't in terms of being able to set rental rates. But again, in my ward, we have very artificially high private rental rates because they're competing with holiday let accommodation, which financially is more appealing. So is there anything within the strategy the council could do to make private renting more financially attractive, to increase supply and therefore improve affordability per private rental by, if you like, putting additional pressure to make holiday letting, particularly those holiday lets that don't pay council tax at all, register as for business rates, less attractive?
Right. Basically, in terms of private sector rents, the Renters' Rights Act does actually bring in much stronger ability for tenants to challenge their rents at a first tier tribunal. And that is the route that they need to go. So the council still doesn't have any powers to dictate private sector rents. So the recourse that private sector tenants have, which is a new right, is to go to the first tier tribunal to appeal against their rent. Also, landlords will be restricted to only increasing the rent once a year.
Thank you. So if that's all the questions, Marie, sorry, you were just looking at me. Did you want to come in? Fine, do.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say with the empty homes, whilst there's no money for an additional officer, if there are reports of empty homes and there are issues within the community, then the private sector housing team do investigate. They do also work with owners of empty homes and signpost them to funding so that they can bring those homes back into use. So there is some work with empty homes that's taking place, but as Gary said, there is no additional funding for more resource at the minute. There's also an East Kent group looking at holiday lets and the competitive market. So I'm sure that in the future, once some of the work comes through that East Kent group, then we can start channeling some of that information through.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues, for a really good discussion. I'd like to move to the vote and thank Gary and colleague officers for all the presentation and answering the questions so comprehensively this evening. I'd like to, Pippa, if we could move to a vote. A vote in favour is a vote to recommend to Cabinet that the Draft Housing Strategy 2026-2030 be approved. Thank you.
That's carried, Chair. 12 for, 1 against, no abstentions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And to say that the date of the next meeting is 7 p.m. Thursday, 10th of September 2026. There is no other urgent business to be dealt with in public, and there is no exclusion of press and public needed for any item. and there's no business under exempt provisions of the Local Government Act or the Freedom of Information Act tonight.